Hi, my name is Megan Salamasic. I'm the owner of the Ferris Bueller House, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Now, if you think classic TV shows like Starsky and Hutch, Gilligan's Island, The Partridge Family, That's My Mama, Vegas, and Chico and the Man have nothing to do with architecture, well, then you'd be right. But we dug deeper into popular culture and found not only a profound connection, but the world's best and most prolific comedy writer. He's an architect. Who would have thought? Who studied with Frank Lloyd Wright and became one of the foremost comedy writers of the 20th century. His name is Ron Friedman. Also joining us today as co-host, the Zoltar of the Zeitgeist, our pal and fellow modernist fan Bob Langford, who keeps coming back despite repeated local, state, and federal restraining orders. And now, the guy who recently bought some shoes not yet unleashed on the public, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hi, folks. Welcome to the show. We are gleefully and gratefully, thanks to you, rocketing into our 5th year of bringing U.S. Modernist Radio almost every week, from the studios here in Raleigh to remote shows in New York, Los Angeles, London, New Canaan, and Palm Springs. And I have to say that our listeners, you, are just the best. You write me with great guest and topic suggestions. You follow and comment on my post as Mr. Modernism on Instagram. You sign up for our exquisitely fun trips to places like Palm Springs and Denmark and Dubai. And you keep me motivated with encouraging reviews on iTunes and other podcast platforms. I just want to say thank you so much. Reach me anytime at george@usmodernist.org. And unless you're a troll or spam, I'll generally answer within 24 hours. U.S. Modernist Radio has gone beyond my wildest dreams, and I want to extend a huge round of applause. Tom, insert applause here. To Tom Guild, who has been a kind mentor, wizard sound engineer, engaging co-host, and such a pleasure to work with. I listened to Tom on FM radio in the 1980s, and he was my favorite DJ. So every time I come in the studio, it's a thrill to work alongside the Tom Guild.
Oh, George.
He was a bit skeptical 5 years ago when I came in and wanted to start an architecture podcast with no experience in architecture or podcasting, plus a cheesy theme song. But he kind of warmed up to the idea and has become an important part of our team, helping the show earn its way to number 2 in Dwell's 2019 list of architecture and design podcasts.
Oh, thank you, George. It's all mic technique and dressing right. I mean, 5 years ago, you said you knew a lot about mid-century design, but what convinced me was the Rolodex you have, because you really do know everyone, and they return your phone calls.
What do you know?
It's amazing.
Our guest today did. I'm really thrilled about that.
Pleasure to be here with him.
So that leaves our frequent co-host, popular culture expert, and fellow modernist fan Bob Langford, who you might remember from our Ferris Bueller episode with Megan Salamasic, where he almost recited the script to the show word for word. We're still trying to find a connection between architecture and Caddyshack, because Bob pretty much knows that movie word for word too. So Bob, how did you get past our security again?
Short story. Here's how I got in. It was sort of a daring combination of Tom Cruise coming down out of the ceiling in Mission Impossible and the gopher in Caddyshack. Here's what I did. I burrowed under the building. It's not as hard as you think. I crawled up through the ventilation system. Luckily, I missed lunch that day, right into Tom's storage room. I slept here all weekend, and that's why some of Tom's snacks are missing. And here I am.
I'm going to fire my guard dog, and I'm going to replace her with lasers.
Lasers.
Watch out.
Coming up in February 2020, Tom and I will be back out in Palm Springs recording U.S. Modernist radio shows at Modernism Week, poolside, with martinis in hand at the U.S. Modernist compound.
Whoa. George, you guys have a compound?
Yeah.
You mean like the Kennedys and Martha's Vineyard?
Indeed, we rent it, and we don't have the private jet or Kanye West coming over to bar some Cristal, but we're working our way up to that. U.S. Modernist has the most fun on our voyages to exciting Palm Springs, and we're having 2 major events there in February. A Hollywood-style gala benefit at the Kirk Douglas House on Wednesday night, with servers buzzing about on delicious appetizer trays, our signature cucumber vodka punch, a jazz singer crooning from his keyboard, plus these amazing cocktail tables that light up from underneath. And of course, everyone is dressed up around the pool looking fantastic as the evening shifts into the coolness of Palm Springs nighttime. We'll also be guiding half-hour day tours of the Kirk Douglas estate on the first Sunday. You can sign up for both of these through the modernismweek.com site. Okay, so Tom mentioned special footwear earlier.
I did.
Some of you know who have seen me at events around the country about a certain blazer that I purchased in Palm Springs.
Oh, yeah.
This blazer has basically its own staff. It is a blazer that can only be worn to certain events because it takes over a room.
It's sort of opposite of understated.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. It's overstated.
It is way overstated. And recently, I was innocently minding my own business online like we all do. And I got an email from Amazon, one of their recommendation emails like, you might like these.
Uh-huh.
And there on the page were these amazing overstated shoes.
Huh.
These shoes shine. They sparkle right at you. So I will be unleashing these shoes in February at Palm Springs.
So we can blame the algorithm.
Yes, it's all the algorithm.
Got it.
U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Modernist Realtor Angela Roll and Nietzscheha.com. In our continuing imaginary space saga, it's episode 8. And now General Angela Roll leads the fight of rebel forces from a secret base on New Fogo Island when a ship of friendly but confusing postmodernists lands and builds a tower that looks like a Chippendale cabinet. With a ship full of ancient target inventory and the last T-111 sighting in the universe, the postmodernists seem oblivious to, well, pretty much everything. With no time to deal with her strange new neighbors, General Angela hijacks an Empire battlecruiser by piping Diana Krall's album, my favorite, The Girl in the Other Room, into the PA system, pulling the entire crew into a luxurious, intoxicating trance. With the newly captured crew blissfully slow dancing, imprisoned in their own shuttle bay, Angela leads the cruiser and her ragtag fleet to attack the Empire homeworld.
Meanwhile, the ghost of Mies appears with a Cuban cigar and a dry martini, and he appears to Deanne, an aspiring modernist on SETI Alpha 6, which used to have really awful sandstorms, but now it's a beautiful planet, famous for a world-class restaurant called the Botany Bay.
Be sure to try the native eel before it tries you.
Mies knows the force is strong in Deanne and transports her with one of those Elizabeth Montgomery nose whales to Palm Springs South, a secret rebel training camp where she'll undergo training in the mystic ways of cantilevers, high-performance glass, and the best darn galactic vodkas on any planet. With the General's attack payoff, will Deanne discover her destiny, and what exactly are those postmodernists doing? Back on Earth, this century's Angela Roll is your heroine of modernist houses, using her architectural training to specialize in modernist real estate, advising buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to getting in the very best restaurant.
Try the eel. Seriously, it tastes like barbecue chicken.
Angela Roll is your special modern real estate agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's Angela, ROEHL.com or 919-995-0550.
Thanks, Bob. Ron Friedman, remember him? He began his career in architecture, graduating from Carnegie Mellon University with a Bachelor of Arts. After working for a few years in architecture, he came to his senses and started writing and performing stand-up comedy. And he was spotted by Dean Martin and Danny Kaye, which launched a career writing for countless TV and variety shows. Ron has been responsible for over 700 hours of beloved primetime TV that you know and probably love, including The Andy Griffith Show, Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, Vegas, and Fantasy Island. Now, if you're younger than 45, you'll know the G.I. Joe series, and of course the epic animated show Transformers, for which Ron wrote 64 episodes. He worked with the legendary and recently departed Stan Lee to create the Marvel Action Hour. He drafted the episode of Happy Days that introduced the Fonz. He also wrote the episode of Bewitched that introduced the practical joking warlock Uncle Arthur, played by Paul Lynde. Plus, he's written 42 feature movies and celebrity specials, and in a career spanning 60 years, he's now a rock star professor teaching comedy writing at Chapman College in California. His new memoir is called I Killed Optimus Prime, the story of how he killed off a beloved character and lived to tell about it. Ron, welcome.
Hello, I'm thinking about the practice of architecture, which included none of the music, none of the laughs that you've been talking about. I must have missed something along the way, particularly with the heat wave that hit, because I remember years of trying not to sweat on vellum. Not easy.
Yeah, sweating on vellum, that is an architectural
that
problem
doesn't come
to deal
out,
with.
does
yeah.
it?
It's also a new rock classic. I'm sure it'll be
I was going to say,
recorded.
great band name.
Yeah, really.
That's it, sweating on vellum, and who cares?
We're so glad you're on the show. We learned about you from our buddies Gilbert Gottfried and Frank Santopadre of Gilbert
Yes, I had
Gottfried's.
the pleasure of being on Gilbert's podcast twice.
Yes. Gilbert seems a little obsessed with Carol Wayne for some reason.
Well, I don't want to examine Gilbert's sexual fantasies too closely unless I can get a couple of injections and get hosed off regularly.
Know him well, do you, Ron?
Yes. Well,
But he sprang that on me. I did not expect it, but that's Gilbert.
well, we're going to spring something on you, but it's going to be much more enjoyable, I think, than that. I am looking at your IMDb page, and holy cow, you wrote episodes.
Well, they missed a lot of the stuff that I did. They always do. And it's not worth the effort to try to correct it, but to have done and had produced over 700 hours of mostly primetime top 10, you can see that IMDb has a few gaps.
Well, it's hard to tell from this list, which goes on for pages and pages. I wanted to mention a couple of other shows that you have been part of that I certainly loved growing up. The Ghost of Mrs. Muir with
Yes.
Hope Lang and Charles Nelson Riley, Fantasy Island, Wonder Woman, Get Smart, The Odd Couple, My Favorite Martian, Barney Miller,
That was
Charlie's
my favorite
Angels.
show. I love My Favorite Martian.
Yeah.
Yep.
And some shows people haven't heard of in a long time, like the San Pedro Beach Bums, Strike Force, Sledgehammer, and Ace Crawford. On top of these, you've written countless specials for celebrities, including one I picked out called Dick Van Dyke Meets Bill Cosby.
Oh, yes, that had to be tabled for almost a year because there was a sketch in which Bill Cosby was a former track star at Temple, was supposed to do a little bit of hurdling. He broke his leg. So we had to shelve the show until he got his leg back.
I assume he's still doing this in federal prison. He's still running that
He better
act.
be, or he will meet friends that he doesn't wish to get too close to.
Yeah. Ron, where did you grow up?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I can
Yes.
tell from the accent.
Oh, I love Pittsburgh, but it took me a while to get rid of my Pittsburgh accent, which goes like this: I'm going to play with an orange in the snow and look in the mirror. Now, this works great if you're a polka band leader or a hold-up man. Nobody objects to those accents. But in the real world, you sound like an idiot.
Oh.
So I had to work not to sound like an idiot, just to remember to act like one.
And what got you into architecture?
Well, I was fortunate in that I had a lot of college scholarships offered, which was a good thing, because my father died when I was 11 and my brother was 9, and my mother, who had been an opera singer and a concert pianist, was reduced to being a piano teacher, which you will not find high on any Fortune 500 list of big-time careers.
Right.
So there was a lot of apprentice poverty. And when it came time to pick a college career, my mother said, you need something to fall back on. So I picked architecture, but I realized later I always had something to fall back on. It's my ass. And when I fall back on it, I get up. But I'd always worked with theater, summer stock. I was a scene designer and an actor, and I really enjoyed it. And I loved writing, and I won awards for writing. But I was fearful. I didn't dare go after it until almost 11 years as an architect. And I learned a lot, and I loved being an architect. But I had two very smart kids, and I thought as an architect, I'm not going to be able to get them anything more than hairdressing school. So I better try another career where maybe I could afford something better. And out of the blue, I thought, I'll write for television.
Well, we're going to get to that in a minute. I want to stay with the architecture for a second. At some time, were you also in West Virginia?
Yes. In fact, my father had a men's clothing store in Weirton, West Virginia, which was a steel town described this way. If you want to give Pennsylvania an enema, you put the bone in Weirton. And if you look at the way the states are formed, the panhandle of West Virginia is ideally placed to slip it to PA.
Yeah, you're right.
Huh. I never noticed that
West
before.
Virginia has a few protuberances.
Protuberances?
Yeah.
I remember on Gilbert's show, you said you guys were like, what, one of 3 Jewish families in Weirton?
That's it. The Holidays Cove Elementary School was being constructed, and there was a fire, so it couldn't open on time. So the Catholic school there, I think the church was Our Lady of the Spanish Inquisition, which was in keeping with the town. They offered to take the students until the new elementary school was open. So the rabbi had to speak to me, and he said, "You will do as they do, you will observe as they observe, except when it comes time to speak the name of their God, you will instead say the word ha." So in other words, everything's cool if you don't say Jesus. So it was all working out until Christmas, and we were singing Christmas carols, and when it got time to sing Christ is born in Bethlehem, I went, ha, is born in Bethlehem. Whereupon the nun, Sister Mary Jew-hater, whacked me with a ruler on the knuckles, and when I said, Jesus Christ, she said, sing it, Jew boy. A golden memory.
Yeah, really.
Hey, Ron, how did you get from West Virginia to architecture, to Carnegie Mellon?
Well, it was Carnegie Tech when I went there. Mellon was a separate entity, highly financed, and it wasn't until years after I'd graduated that they formed a liaison and became the superb school it is now. It was always superb and always tough, and I'm very glad I became an architect and made it through 5 years, and I can proudly say I came out of a 5-year program with no student debt.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I owed that to a lot of good scholarships and a lot of jobs, but I don't think many graduates of any 4-year program or even 2-year program can say that now.
You met a number of famous architects along the way.
I did. Caesar Pelli was one, because my friend Charlie Shaw was the guy who put together the Museum Tower, which is the tower of condos attached to the Museum of Modern Art.
Right.
And he was a very engaging guy who made the escalator an architectural feature, I think first enunciated at the Beaubourg Plateau in France. Interesting guy, and of course there was my brief meeting with Frank Lloyd Wright, who was, it was a fascinating moment in time, and that came about because Wesley Peters, who was his chief draftsman, was coming through Pittsburgh, stopped at the architectural department, where I had won an award from Bloomcraft, which was one of the first companies to build unitized stair parts, so every metal stair didn't have to be a custom job. And he saw that, and he said, I think you'd be comfortable with the fellowship. And he said, could you come to Taliesin West now before we move to Taliesin East? So I arranged to do that. I arrived in Arizona on a day where the Gila monsters were vomiting in the heat, and I was met by a guy in Renaissance brocade with a feather in his hat. And he said, the master has sent me to pick you up. Master in Renaissance brocade. I said, it's hot as hell. Why are you dressed that way? And he said, the master likes a little boccherini of a Sunday afternoon.
Huh.
Yes, and I arrived, and in the sweltering heat, there was a Renaissance quartet playing boccherini, and all his acolytes sitting there in the blazing sun, and I realized I was not in a sane universe.
How long were you there, Ron?
Memory tells me 20 minutes, but I think it was actually 2.5 weeks.
Okay.
When they were then moving to Taliesin East in Spring Green, Wisconsin, and I was invited to come, and I was told $300 a month. I said, I need more money than that. I can't do that. No, you pay us. So that really cemented the fact that I wasn't going to go. But the first day there, Wright shows up late. Nobody could eat or do anything until he arrived. with his pork pie hat and his scarf streaming in the breeze and his homespun jacket, and everybody was silent, and he stood up and held up a snail shell. And he says, "The snail, a magnificent architect, his home a volute. No 3 little glass windows in the front door for the 3 little bears. This is a home." And he went on. And I was thinking, boy, this is brilliant. And then I saw everybody sitting there mouthing it. They'd heard it 1,000 times. Oh. I don't want to say he was gaga, but anyway, I thought he was a brilliant architect. I loved a lot of his stuff, particularly Falling Water, which I went to see frequently. And by the way, it leaked. Every time it rained, the floor in the living room was soaked because the deck outside was the same level as the floor. Inside, there was no curb, and it just was a wash in rain. But what do you do? In my years in architecture, little catchphrases like less is more and form follows function, they were scattered about like pearls. They had about as much relevance now as they really did then, but I don't know what the new mantra would be for architecture anymore. I think it would be, if it looks like something you've never seen and don't want to see again, you're home. Huh. I see a lot of architecture now as stage design for impact. That's okay, but I kind of like the inside and the outside to go together. So the Disney Hall, the Frank Gehry thing, which I saw on opening performance night at the request of an architect friend who had the invitation, I admired the impossibility of the structure. Without computers, you could never do a shop drawing. I don't know how the hell they'd have built it or even come to the engineering without computers. But whatever it is, it's memorable. You will not confuse that with a home for the aged or for a bar in a bad neighborhood.
Right.
But I question, is it architecture? Yeah, sure, it's a building. But is that what I signed on for years ago? And the answer would have been no.
Well, let's talk about years ago, and what were some of the projects you designed after you came back from Taliesin?
Well, I was still in school, so I was in my junior year. I still had to go to my sub-senior and then senior year. And in Pittsburgh, as an architect, I designed television stations and radio stations. I designed churches, synagogues, hospitals, schools, apartment complexes, shopping centers, supermarket chains, easy credit jewelers, where if you had a pulse, you could buy a diamond.
Yeah, we still have those.
Questionable luster, but nonetheless. So I was if you'll pay me, I'll do it. I also had my own practice, and I was the head designer, field supervisor of a medium-sized Pittsburgh firm. And I learned to do everything, and I learned from contractors on the job exactly what architecture was about. Because if you can't build it and it won't hold up, I don't care how beautiful it is, it's not serving its purpose.
Tell us about Friedman, the fantastic architect.
Oh, yes.
Your client.
This is when I knew it was time to move on. I get a call and a woman says, "Is this Friedman, the fantastic architect?" I said, "No, by no means, you have the wrong number." She says, "Don't be off-put by my accent. I want Friedman, the fantastic architect. I have a nice piece of property, almost an acre on Shenley Park. Carte blanche. Carte blanche, you build whatever you see, whatever you envision, you do that." I said, "I'll come and see you." So I go to see her, and it's an old woman with purple hair and pedal pushers. Her husband, Jake, is reading the Jewish newspaper and looking the other way. When she says, "Jake, the artichoke is here," and he goes, "Nah, nah." She says, "Don't listen to him, he's a Philistine." And she takes me into the den, and she says, "I wouldn't want to dictate, but..." And she opens a closet, and out fall thousands of copies of House Beautiful, House Not So Beautiful, How to Make a House for $10, and all of it with clippings.
Oh,
and I said, I can't do that. You have the wrong guy. Don't want to do that. No, ignore, forget. You don't have, ignore. Just one thing. I said, "What's that?" "Has to be a ranch-style house." I said, "You mean one story in the park?" "Yes, one story." I said, "Okay, with a circular staircase."
Wait a second.
I said, "A circular staircase in a ranch-style one-story? Yes. Do you want to go up to the roof? No, I hate heights. I wouldn't go up. But why do you want the circular staircase? She said, we'll have parties. I'll put a maid in a white dress at the bottom. It'll look terrific. I passed it up.
I wonder why.
I wondered why, too. I could have made a fortune. Purity, you can keep purity. I'll tell you, when I learned about the difference between art and commerce, I was working for an architect named Whitey Rosenberg, and it later turned out that Whitey had designed the store that my father had in Pittsburgh many years earlier. And Whitey said, you're a hot designer. I'm going to give you a hot commission. I have this bar in the Hill District. I want you to go wild. Just do whatever you think would make a hell of a great-looking bar. You draw it up and you tell me when you're ready. So I did that. I thought it looked really, really nifty, really cool, really hot. Really, I was proud of it. And then Whitey came in. He says, first, you know where this bar is? I said, yes. He says, they look to get their drinks cheap. In other words, when they walk past, there are a lot of bars. You want them to look at this one and say, I'm going to go there. I can get the booze there cheap. He said, so that means we get rid of this. And he got rid of the glass. He got rid of the aluminum. He got rid of the stuff I had done. And he says, we're going to put up fake stone, because nothing says cheap like fake stone. And he was right. He said, and then we're going to trim the doorway with aluminum siding. He says, because that backs it up. This is cheap. I can get a lot to drink here for cheap. He said, then you do whatever the hell you want to do with the rest of it, but you got to have a lights-up switch. And I said, what's a lights-up switch? He said, then if a knife fight starts, the bartender hits the lights-off switch, it locks the doors and keeps the lights on until the police arrive.
Wow.
So, take that, Bozar.
So how did comedy writing come into your life once you decided you were going to get out of the architecture business?
Well, I had always written, and I always worked in theater when I could, and I loved that. I loved show business. I loved writing, but I wanted to write plays, and so Shelley Berman was a famous comedian.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the late 50s into the 60s and 70s. He was appearing in Pittsburgh. I'd met him in summer stock, and I thought, I'm going to need to make money. I can make money if I write for comedians. I can get $10,000 for writing an act. I knew this, so I figured I'm going to go for it. Anyway, I called Shelley, and I said, I can write for you. He said, no, schmuck, nobody can write for me. I said, well, give me a shot. Just give me your address. I'll send you some stuff if you like it. He said, all right. He gave me his address. So I wrote some stuff, and about 6 weeks later, he calls me. He says, you can do this shit. Come to New York. I'm on the Perry Como show. I'll get you an agent. So I arranged to get the week off, and I flew to New York, go to the Como show, and there's Shelley, and I say, Shelley, Ron Friedman. He says, I'm having a nervous breakdown. I'm going to Jamaica. I can't talk to you. I said, I came in from Pittsburgh, Shelley. He said, it will be there when you return. So I'm standing there. And luckily, my fraternity brother, Gary Smith, was the scene designer for the Como show. And he said, did you bring any material? I said, yeah, I wrote about 10 pounds of stuff. He says, well, give it to me. I'll give it to the head writer, Goodman Ace, a famous name in radio writing and then television.
Sure. Yeah.
And he said, we'll have lunch, and we come back, let's see what Goody says. So I come back, and Goody Ace says, come with me. And he takes me to a room, and he points into the room. He said, if any of these Jews die, I'll hire you. These were his writers. He said, but I have no money in the budget. I can't put you on. But come on, I'll take you to William Morris, and Larry Auerbach will sign you. I'll tell him to sign you. Larry Auerbach, later chairman of the William Morris Company. Anyway, he did, and he said, you're going to have to come to New York. You cannot write from Pittsburgh. So it took me about a year to sell my practice for $11. And then I went to New York, and for the first 3.5, 4 months, it was difficult. But I finished that year making 10 times the money I'd ever made in my best year as an architect.
Wow.
Yeah, ridiculous.
That's a good story.
Absolutely. I was very lucky. I just followed my heart, and for some reason it all felt absolutely logical.
You had, after studying at Carnegie Tech, after
Yes.
going to Arizona to study under Frank Lloyd Wright, albeit for a short amount of time, and then
Right.
starting your own practice.
I did while I was also in practice with a reputable firm, working hard. So I was working 7 days a week, and I was at the point where I was getting some government work, like a post office, where they would tell you everything had to look a certain way, and the colors of the tiles and so on were apple green and baby shit brown, and that was it. No arguments.
I've been in that post office.
And, I was actually making a living, but I wasn't making enough for what I felt I needed to get my kids properly educated. Whatever it was, and I've examined it looking back, it just felt like the right thing to do, and it turns out it was.
But before you made that switch, you had to tell your mom. How'd that go?
My mother said, before you leave, there's a knife in the kitchen. Put it in my heart now, because I'll never hear from you again.
After Shelley Berman, was it Dean Martin or Danny Kaye that hired you next?
Danny Kaye.
Danny Kaye.
Yes.
I understand Danny Kaye loved the fact that you studied with Frank Lloyd Wright for those 2 weeks.
Oh, he did. He absolutely did. He enjoyed hearing that tremendously. And to him, it put me in a different place than the other writers who were there, each one of whom had kind of a predictable career. They always wanted to be in the business, and they were always active in it, and they just got a good job writing for the Kaye Show. But I came from another life, and Danny was a guy who had many lives, one of the most brilliant people I ever knew. He was a licensed commercial pilot. He could fly anything, helicopter, big jets, anything. He was also a master Chinese chef. He apprenticed in the kitchen of Johnny Can's restaurant in San Francisco, just like any Chinese guy who wanted to learn to be a chef. Danny did that in the kitchen. And he would have a Chinese feast every year for the writers at his house when he made all the dishes. And to watch Danny Kaye disjoint ducks or chickens with hatchets in both hands, that was something. He was also a cordon bleu chef, and he was a medical junkie whose closest friend was Dr. DeBakey, the pioneer in heart replacement
Heart transplant,
surgery.
right?
Right.
And he was on staff at heart replacements.
Really?
He actually assisted. He was that capable, and the irony is he was having a bladder check, and the technician hit the bladder, and he needed a transfusion, and the blood that he received was contaminated with hepatitis C. So Danny was then dead. He knew he would not live, and with all of his medical knowledge, he had to watch and track the course of his demise.
Oh, man.
Is that
Terrible.
what killed him?
Yes.
Oh, man.
It did. Because I'm sure he'd still be around. I'm sure he would have to be shot at sunrise. Otherwise, he would continue. He was a life force. He was not sweet to everybody, but he was really nice to me, which surprised the hell out of my fellow writers and also surprised me.
You worked, Ron, with Danny Kaye and Jonathan Winters, who, to the public, like us, just looked like
Jonathan and I became very good friends. I was his head writer for almost 5 years. I even knew where Maud Frickert came from, and if you know Johnny Winters, you know his character of Maudie Frickert.
Yeah.
Where did Ms. Frickert come from?
Well, I asked him one day, where did you get Maudie? And he looked around like immigration was coming to take it back to Guatemala. And then he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline was, "Newsboy Marries Best Customer." And it showed an old woman with dancing eyes sitting in a wheelchair, and behind her was like a 6'6" newsboy with his tongue hanging out. And Jonathan said, "I saw that, and I got the whole picture. Show it to me, Leonard. Show it. Oh, put it back. Save it for the honeymoon." And that was it.
That's amazing.
Jonathan Winters and Danny Kaye, to the public, just looked like they were constantly improvising and generating their lines.
Danny, not so much.
Yeah.
Jonathan, every bit of time he could improvise, he loved to do that. And he loved to improvise with me. And when the Jonathan Winters show was canceled on CBS, Johnny wanted me to hang out with him every day. But I couldn't do that because, much as I loved him, when a comic isn't on and not working, a lot of them go into deep, dark depression land where they paint the windows black and just say, it all sucks, bad scene, whatever. I couldn't live that way.
I remember when the comedian Andy Kaufman famously took his whole audience out for milk and cookies in buses, but that was something that evidently Jonathan Winters had done earlier.
Yes, he did that at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco. But what happened is something that not only happened to Jonathan, it happened to Robin Williams, it happened to Tim Conway, it happened to a lot of comics. And that is, you get on a roll, everything's going great, you don't want to stop. And in Jonathan's case, he did his last 4 shows at the Hungry Eye and then said, let's keep going. And he took everybody out to the Buena Vista to get Irish coffee and was continuing into the Rising of the Sun, where they ended up at the Balclutha, which is a sailing ship permanently moored in San Francisco Harbor. And he then leaped across the ropes, keeping the public out until it's open, and started to climb the yardarm, doing his impression of Charles Lawton from Mutiny on the Bounty. And as he said, the guys in the white coats took him away, showed him how to make rope-soled shoes, and gave him an opportunity to calm down in an atmosphere of prevailing white uniforms.
Yeah.
But Johnny was not nuts. What he was doing was he didn't want to go to sleep because the fear was when you get up, your joker will be broken.
It's all gone. Yeah.
That's the term of art. Your joker will be broken. Like somehow you'll lose it. You won't get it back.
Do you ever have that fear?
No, because I'm lucky in this regard. I don't have to be on. I don't need it like blood or oxygen. That's why I've refused 2 opportunities to work as a comedian. One was from Jack Rollins, who was Woody Allen's manager, and the other was from Abby Greshler, who managed Tony Randall and Jack Klugman. They each wanted to groom me, starting with a career as a stand-up and then moving into other things, playwright and so on. And I told them both the same thing. I know what that life is like because I had to travel with comics I wrote for. And I don't want to be sitting in Erie, Pennsylvania at 4 a.m. That's not the life I wanted. I wanted to be there for my kids. I wanted to have a life. Anyway, so I don't have that kind of primitive need. I've got to be on. I don't have that, so I could live a more regular life.
Speaking of regular lives,
yes.
While George and Tom take a few moments to kind of install the ventilation lasers and pour concrete in my new underground tunnel system, let's take a short break for these relaxing words from our newest sponsor, Nichiha.
Beauty, love, durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good. And you love feeling this good. Nichiha, 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 Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Nichiha, Nichiha, Nichiha. That's NICH. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichiha.
Thank you, George. I'm much more peaceful now. Nichiha to all of you.
Nichiha.
We are back with Ron Friedman, architect turned legendary comedy writer. Ron, I'm guessing that a recent Amazon TV show that must warm your heart, both for the content as well as the writing, is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Yes, I get a great kick out of the show, but it is, let's put it this way, on the scale of reality, the way it really was, it wasn't.
Well, yeah.
But it's a sugar-coated look back, and it's delightful, and I think brilliantly done. But it eliminates one of the in-place kind of structural membranes for that era, which does not appear on that show, and that was the mob. Because every nightclub, every bar, every comedy venue, every restaurant had a wise guy connection. If you wanted to get your laundry done in the city, or get your liquor delivered, or get your garbage taken away, or have things taken care of if there was a problem with the health inspector, you would be dealing with the mob. It was an ever-present force, and there was nothing funny about it. If you knew the practitioners of the mob arts, they were some scary guys, and they were always there. Always there.
Well, maybe in season 3, maybe The Sopranos will merge with Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and bring a little reality.
That is an apt name to drop, The Sopranos. I knew a lot of those guys because you inevitably would meet them, and if you made them laugh, they were usually happy to be around you, but there were some of them that they really looked like somebody from a Quentin Tarantino movie, or that was Martin Scorsese. Let me introduce you to all of these guys, and if you remember their names, you'll be dead by Tuesday.
Tough room.
It was kind of scary. What I say to my students, because I've been teaching screenwriting at USC for almost 18 years, and I've been teaching at Chapman University for 15, 7 of those years overlapping, I always say that the reality is far more interesting than the let's pretend version. But in the reality, nobody was polite at a nightclub. You either made them laugh, or they threw heavy glass ashtrays at you.
Wow.
Or they beat you up. So if you couldn't actually get a laugh out of them, they punished you. Same for singers that weren't liked. It was a blood sport in every sense of the word. And I remember seeing some comics who would silence hecklers, and in the front tables they were often wise guys with hookers. They would silence them by belting them over the head with the microphone. It put the fear of God into you, I got to tell you.
It was a battle then, huh?
They were battlefields, you bet. And if some comic could honestly get laughs out of people, then that comic was beloved. And very often the laughs would just come, if everybody was drunk enough, by somebody just saying something dumb or going over to an obvious hitman and saying, hairdresser, and holding his hand up. And then everybody would roar, no, he ain't no hairdresser. It's what you call basic low humor.
Right. Ron, you've worked with a lot of amazing actresses over your career. I have to ask about my 40-year crush. Did you get to meet Linda Carter on Wonder Woman?
Ooh.
No, but I met her elsewhere. I think it was at some Emmy thing or something, and we said hello. She was very nice, very sweet.
She cut an album at the time, and now
yes,
she
sings pretty well.
She does. I got to hear her sing in part of Lincoln Center, I guess, in New York City. It was just magical. It was just fanboy crush. There she is singing, looking as gorgeous as she did 40 years ago. It was pretty incredible.
I'm a fan, too. I always have been, and I always will be. I really respect and idolize people that have the gift and have the willingness to share it. And there are some people who are tremendously gifted, but they are really grudging. Miles Davis, whom I knew was like that, he would punish his fans. You'd show up for an evening with Miles, you'd be lucky if he did 8 bars. It was just partly because he was terminally angry with no cause, because he was really admired and beloved everywhere. But he would often simply not perform. He would withhold his gift. I like the ones that are more generous. performers who really want to share it because they love to see people enjoy it. That was Robin Williams. I wish I'd known him better. I met him briefly with Jonathan, and because Jonathan introduced us, Robin was immediately interested. But circumstances where he was working on other things and I was working on other things, and we never got to spend time together, which I always regretted because I knew we'd have been great friends.
You had a long association with Bewitched, where Elizabeth Montgomery starred in her famous nose wiggle.
Yes.
And you created one of the most funny characters I can ever remember, Uncle Arthur.
Uncle Arthur. Yes, Paul Lynde, Uncle Arthur. He was instant funny.
Instantly.
As long as Paul wasn't drinking, he was great. The minute he'd have a couple drinks, he would turn into Stormtrooper number 5. He was horrible. But when he wasn't drinking, just a brilliant and instantly funny guy. He could make anything funny.
I remember watching some of those shows, and when he would come on the screen, the whole tone of the show would change. Mm-hmm. It just got to be hilarious right away.
Well, I first became aware of him in a show called New Faces of 1952. I think that was 52, not 50. And in it, he shows up on a crutch, wrapped in bandages. It looks like he's been in a horrible explosion, but he's all smiles, laughing throughout as he talks about his African adventure. And then the canoe sank, and it's hilarious. But then you find out why he's so happy, and it's because a lion ate his wife.
Ba-da-bump.
Ba-da-bump.
Yeah, it was hysterical, and that brought him to the attention of everybody, and he never stopped working after that.
And he was in Bye Bye Birdie in the early 60s. That was a big breakthrough for him.
Wherever he was, instant funny. And I love one of his lines on Hollywood Squares, which to me was the most brilliant. It was his favorite line, and the question was, what Hollywood star said, "What a dump"? And he said, "Dumbo."
I think it was actually Betty Davis, wasn't it?
So, Bob, you have a story about Elizabeth Montgomery.
You want to hear it?
Yes,
I'll do a quick version. Elizabeth Montgomery was starring in a made-for-TV movie on a local poisoner named Blanche Moore, I believe her name was. And she poisoned her husband.
Oh, yeah,
and
right.
So
in Raleigh, a true story.
I was the television critic at the Raleigh News and Observer. And so I, of course, got an interview with Elizabeth Montgomery. She was in L.A., I was in Raleigh. And we're talking about this movie. Tell me about how do you get inside a woman who poisons her husband, et cetera, et cetera. But we both have the TV on. And so we're watching the television as we're speaking, and it is the day that the ATF raids the David Koresh compound.
Waco.
Yeah, Waco. So we stopped. So she goes to me, "Can we stop for a second? Are you watching this?" I said, "I am. Are you?" And so we were both astounded at what we're watching on CNN.
Yeah.
And turns out we watched history together. It was just wild. And it was a much better story because I could incorporate all that stuff into it than just, I played this lady who poisoned her husbands.
Wow.
So
there you go. With deaths and fire is always mesmerizing.
Yeah, that's a special bond.
We'll always have that to share.
We'll
it's
always
true.
have Waco.
We'll always. I don't put it quite that way, George, but yes, Elizabeth Montgomery and I will always have Waco.
Ron, I've heard that you tell your students that there are two powerful forces in the universe that truly make people happy. What are those?
Do I?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what they might be.
The two forces, the only true things that make people happy? I thought I heard you say this in one of your lectures. It was fruitful labor and reciprocal love?
Well, it sounds like it's worthy of being etched in marble.
It is now.
It is now.
No,
we're
part of your lecture now.
I will definitely include it in, along with the frontispiece. What does this mean? Word told to you in an alien tongue. That's news to me, but those are certainly words to march to.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, of all the shows you've done, and you've done so many, which of your shows do you think most captured the public's love for the longest period of time? I mean, we all still know the tune for Gilligan's Island, for example, but of all the shows, which have kind of penetrated the public's mind for the longest, do you think?
I'm guessing now. The Odd Couple is certainly one which has enormous longevity.
Yeah.
And devoted fans, as I hear every year on the anniversary date of Felix Unger being tossed out of his wife's apartment. I get a bevy of emails and calls. I would say Bewitched is one of the evergreens because the setup is so simple and comprehensible, and it's basically a happily married couple where the husband has big problems with the in-laws. It is so basic that everybody understands it, whatever their persuasion is. It's just a human situation where families don't gel. And also the young couple is very much in love, which transcends any kind of sexual orientation because love is love, and the vast audience out there recognizes that, and they're just happy to see it. So when you have that element of love, 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 sweet love, and then you have who's going to screw it up next, and it's an uncle, it's an aunt, it's a cousin, it's a sister.
It's Dr. Bombay, yeah.
Yes. And then, of course, with the addition of magic, that absolutely sells it, because even those that claim they don't like special effects secretly love magic, because we all wish we had that incantation to turn the water into wine. We all wish we knew what we would need to say under what circumstances, bury the toad under the light of the full moon so that we could get what we really lust for. Everybody understands that, and wish fulfillment is an enormous crowd pleaser, and it's always in demand, or there would never have been the Arabian Nights, and there would never have been a Marvel universe, because those are really all about magic, the transformation of the ordinary by extraordinary means. We all respond to that. And oddly enough, the more familiar and ordinary the setting, the more potent is the response to the magic. So, simple household, young husband, young wife, young kids, and magic? Wow, how about that?
All over the place.
It's a formula, too, where discovery, the fear of discovery, is always lurking at the fringes. It was the same in Alf. It was the same in I Dream of Jeannie. There's always the neighbor, the general, or somebody who might suddenly reveal the deep, dark secret that
Mrs. Kravitz next door.
Yep.
Alice Ghostly. She was such a great character actor.
Alice was great. Alice was Paul Lynde.
She was, wasn't she?
Yep.
And we cast Alice and Paul on 17 consecutive Jonathan Winter shows, because Johnny could react to each one of them with such hysterical response. It was just fabulous, because each of them were instantly funny. Alice in her way, Paul in his, and they were kind of parallel in their world view, which was, I don't know what you're looking at, but I'm looking at
Ron, we have a little something special for you to close things out today.
All right. If it's organ donation, I've already given this month. There's nothing left.
There'll be a man at your door shortly.
Of course.
Some of the poetry by Emily Dickinson and a theme to Gilligan's Island have the exact same rhythm. So, with profound apologies to Emily Dickinson and all the literature majors out there who will recoil in disgust.
I can't believe where this is going.
And I want to include...
Carry on. I know it's a thing without feathers, but keep going.
I want to include special apologies to my wonderful friend and literature major and watercolor artist, Liz Gazinski, who surely regrets telling me this Gilligan Dickinson secret 20 years ago. And if she didn't then, she certainly will now that we actually sing it. So you ready, guys?
Okay.
Ready? Okay, here we go. Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tragic port aboard this tiny ship. Dickinson. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. So join us here each week, my friends, you'll sure to get a smile from 7 stranded castaways here on Gilligan's Isle.
I am deeply moved. It's deeply.
Yeah.
What an insane marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gilligan's Island and Emily Dickinson.
Sounds like a sitcom.
Boy, it really does. I'm waiting for Jimmy Hoffa and Zubin Mehta.
That's
Why not?
sure.
Fabulous.
Ron, thanks so much for joining us. This has been a blast.
It's been a blast for me, too, and completely unexpected to somehow wed a life in architecture to anything that did not involve the Dodge books of architectural references, T-squares, triangles, T-square cleaners, and the like. It's astonishing. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for finding me somewhere in that misty, never ground between architecture and wah!
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for Modernist Houses, and Nichiha.com.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.6 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Contact George at usmodernist.org or on Instagram at mr.modernism. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Our esteemed guests get thoroughly Googled by Chief Researcher Cindy Stratton, not a real name, who just bought land in Greenland, hoping for a quick profit when Trump puts a hotel there. Right. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guiled. As soon as we get security to escort Bob Langford yet again from the building, George and I'll be back with another academic, structured, appropriate, classy, respectful, not at all kitschy edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
A 3-hour tour. A 3-hour
Our tour.
Get your hands off me!